Hello, Bookstew viewers and listeners. I have an interesting connection with this author that I'm going to tell you about, and then I'm going to bring him on to tell you about a remarkable adventure book that I read 2 years ago and have not been able to forget. So, a while back, 2 years ago, my sister in law, who's in a book club, recommended a book and an author to me, and she shared the book, and I read it. And, I have a lot of authors who are given to me basically by publicists, and this book came to me kind of through a family connection, so I should have paid more attention to it, but I didn't at the time, but now I am. So I must give credit to Hugh's sister-in-law, Marietta Gill, who is also part of the same book club as my sister-in-law, Susan MacDougall. So with all that said, this book is called Beyond Two Rivers, and the author is Hugh Rogers, who's known as Buck in the book. And Hugh and his two brothers, in the summer of 1972, set off from Vermont and end up in Fairbanks, Alaska, all by driving a car, all with no cell phones, little contact with their families or anybody else while they were traveling. And the intent was to go fishing and to see fish that you would not see in Vermont or in Connecticut, where Hugh grew up. So Hugh, or Buck, as you're called in the book, welcome to Book Stew.
Thank you very much, Eileen. It's great to be here.
So I have a million questions that deal with both the past and today, if you were to embark on an adventure like this today. So let's start with you telling us how you and your brothers came up with this idea of doing such an amazing drive with the intent to fish and camp and hike in 1972 without cell phones.
Well, we'd been reading outdoor magazines, fishing and hunting magazines. Not that we're hunters, but it's from the times we were middle school. And they were filled with stories of amazing fishing all over the place, but especially in Alaska. And Alaska was as far north as you could get by car. It was as far away as you could get from Connecticut as just about anywhere you could get by car, except for going to South America. And there were stories of gigantic trout being caught in South America, but we did not want to go there because we didn't have the language, we didn't have the cultural experience, we didn't know what we might get into. But the idea of driving across Canada into Alaska at least sounded possible. And so that sort of hatched, and it began to sound more real as we began to flesh it out. But it also seemed logical. It was a place that we'd read about for a long time. We knew that if we got there, we could enjoy not only tremendous fishing, but also amazing sights of the mountains and the vast expanse of wilderness. And that experience we certainly did get. So that's kind of how we got to the point where it was sort of like, let's finally do this. And we figured out which car we would use. And it turned out to be my brother's 1963 Plymouth Belvedere. And we put 4 retread tires on it in Rutland, Vermont. And on the 4th of July, we took off from southern Vermont. And we had no idea. We had a summer off, or at least I did. I just finished college. My youngest brother, Ben, had the summer because he was in a private school and he'd be returning in the fall. And Tim my middle brother, had decided to forego college and was painting houses so he could save up money and be gone for as long as he wanted to, but he'd never been either. And I think the three of us all together wanting to do it made it happen.
Well, you also had an ulterior motive in that, due to family situations, the three of you had kind of grown apart. And you saw this as a chance to have an adventure and bring the three of you back together again. And I think one thing the book portrays beautifully is the difference in the three of your personalities and how you each handled all the adversity that was thrown your way, both the natural adversity of being in the wilderness, depending on a not so great car, and also depending on each other. So I think the interpersonal relationships, living out of a car, and Ben didn't even drive at the time, was really so much a part of the saga.
It was. Some of that was maybe subconscious in with me, um, but I some of it and some of it was conscious with me. Um, we had been separated for a number of years because of uh, our upbringing and a broken home. And um, we, at one point, Tim and I had been sent off to an orphanage for running away from home. Um, and we hadn't spent much time together. Ben had stayed home. Our older sister had also stayed home, but I felt like I really didn't know my two brothers very well, and um, I thought that this would be an opportunity to get to know them and hopefully restore the relationship we'd had before all of the family troubles began, when we did go to opening day together as youngsters and enjoyed just the freedom of being on the river catching fish together. Um, and so that was one of the things that was in the back of my mind. Um, and we were older now, so we could actually make this adventure concrete, put it together, and actually perform it. So uh, that that was, the initiative, the starting point. And back in those days, it didn't really um, phase us that we didn't have a closed itinerary. It was pretty much, pool the resources. How far can we drive? And when we run out of money halfway, we'll just turn around and come back. But the goal is to get to Alaska and do some fishing and see if we can't make this dream come true.
Well, I have to admit, another reason was so fascinated by the story is in the same year, 1972, when you were driving across Canada, I was hitchhiking across the United States with four
Oh,
other people, which was very difficult to find rides with five of us. Ended up splitting up eventually and ended up in Colorado, where my boyfriend at the time pulled draft number 8 in the draft lottery, and we had to
boy.
turn around and come back and deal with that.
Yeah.
But then the following year, we took a train across Canada. We started in Vancouver and we ended up in Montreal. And in those days, you could do that for $50 a ticket, and you could get on and off the train whenever you wanted. So we hit a lot of the places that you hit: Banff, Lake Louise, Saskatchewan. So that was my equivalent of that adventure. But,
Oh,
hitchhiking is different than driving in a car, but driving a car on the Alaska Canada highway is another thing altogether. So I'm going to ask you to do a brief reading that kind of kicks off the journey, and then we'll talk some more about the hardships of the trip.
thank you. I just want to say that train trip you took was, you know, just as, and well, especially the hitchhiking trip, that's even more um, kind of adventurous in the sense that there are, you don't know where your next ride's coming from or who it's going to be. And that can turn out to be uh, a welcome relief or a hair-raising experience. And yeah, so sure. What would you like me to read?
I think we were going to start at the beginning of chapter 2.
Ah, um, and go to bottom of 12 or
Yep.
okay. It was the summer of 1972 when I took a journey with my two brothers, Ben and Tim, across North America and as far north as you could then go by car. Our journey was shaped by the dynamics among us a long way from home, together for the first time in 8 years, and an even longer way from the comforts and routines we knew. As kids, whenever home life had gotten too rough, we lit out for our sanctuary, the rivers and fields away from the war. And when that conflict finally broke us up, those rivers became the lifelines through which we remained connected. They carried us to worlds where discovery only revealed itself to the watchful eye, the welcoming heart, and the peaceful soul. There we found treasures, the reassurance of motion, companionship, and solitude, all strengthened by the trials we encountered. Some people seek their identity in family trees, but what we had come to realize was that the trees in the forest, along with the hills, the meadows, and especially the rivers, had become our family. So we went to the wilderness, and wilderness for us had always pointed north. Wilderness became a repository for us. More than merely an escape, it became the framework against which we measured the drunken incoherence of our domestic life. At a time in our lives when we needed a family greatly, at that point in every young man's life, when he's asking himself where his true directions lay, we turned to the direction we knew, the wild, and the wildest place we knew was Alaska. None of this was conscious. If you had asked us at the time, we were going for the fishing that we'd read about and seen in magazines for years. The fish weren't just bigger, there were more of them, lots more, and all of them were wild. There were no scrawny, pasty-fleshed, hatchery-raised fish like those at home. Their abundance tested our environmental conscience. It also gave us a penetrating experience in just how incredibly bountiful the pure, unadulterated wilderness was. It was sickening to suddenly realize so viscerally that this volume of life was once the rule everywhere, and how seriously our species had impoverished our spiritual lives in pursuit of material progress. This was in the days before computers and cell phones, when payphones and collect calls were the emergency lifelines to home. But they were expensive, and mostly we mailed postcards or letters, knowing that on the move, we sent our narratives one way without expecting anything coming back. Perhaps we wrote to let others at home know we were still alive and not to worry, but perhaps we also wrote to assure ourselves that there would be a home to return to when we were done with our road test. And maybe there was even a hope that the home we left would somehow transform itself in our absence into a truly nurturing destination, a place welcoming our return and worthy of our devotion. The plan was simple: go west and north, hiking and fishing until we had enough or ran out of money, or both. We did ask our older sister Tamsin along, but she declined, not without good reason, as it turned out. Accompanying three young men with fire in their eyes was risky. This trip wasn't about reason. It was about challenge, spontaneity, and endurance. It included a penchant for bad behavior and the need to face the result and find a way out of it by cleverness, luck, or a bottomless well of youthful strength. There was quite a bit not commonly known about travel in Alaska in 1972. Available information came in the form of a stubby magazine called The Milepost. It described the facilities, sites, and activities from the beginning of the Alaska-Canada Highway in Dawson Creek, British Columbia, to Fairbanks, Alaska. And it presented them all with a sense of adventure and plenty of reminders that this trip had more than its share of pitfalls. The list of hazards was long and novel, which the milepost provided cautions for while downplaying them. The authors were trying to promote tourism, so when they mentioned rough roads, those were very different from what suburbanites had in mind. Rough roads could mean a section with potholes the size of pool tables, or stretches with washboards that turned your car's suspension into jelly. The authors casually suggested that installation of a grille screen and transparent headlight cones was a good idea. These accessories served to deflect rocks thrown from the wheels of oncoming tractor trailers into or sometimes through your windshield or headlights. Later, we'd see a few cars that had obviously made the trip or part of it without this protection. They were easy to spot. They looked like the last remaining car in the demolition derby. The Alcan was just as remarkable for what it didn't have. Service stations to make the inevitable repairs were rare. A particularly lonesome one, deep in the Yukon Territory, had no full service, but was a much welcome sight. The garage, a bedroom-sized plywood shanty where the mechanic kept a few tools and a jack, rose from a roughly cleared patch of forest. He worked on your car outside, on the gravel, where the single hand gas pump stood. For over 100 miles in either direction, there was nothing else, nothing man-made except for the gravel surface of the Alcan itself. No phone poles, no power lines, no houses or buildings of any kind. There was no posted speed limit. The road itself limited your speed. In fact, there were no signs at all from any of the categories you'd studied in your driver's ed text. No diamond-shaped hazard signs, no rectangular regulation signs, no commercial signs, and no billboards. There were no direction signs either. None were needed. There were no turnoffs. It was one of those rare situations in which you couldn't get lost. You were in the middle of nowhere and the middle of everywhere at the same time. Then there were the subjective hazards that the milepost never mentioned, the psychological and emotional tolls from compulsive driving, stemming from the ever-strengthening conviction that if you didn't keep driving, you'd never get there. At the same time, you were acutely aware that, precisely because of this distance from home, it was very unlikely that you would ever see what you were passing again in your life. It wasn't boredom. It was the fatigue from extended immersion in another world. The Alcan experience was of such relentless duration that once you were committed to the drive, turning back didn't seem an option. It became a sense of destiny you were compelled to fulfill.
Oh, so if there's any person alive who doesn't want to delve in from there and find out exactly what happened, I wouldn't believe it. But now looking back on this, my first question about the creation of it is, at what point did you decide that you needed to write or wanted to write up the adventure itself?
Um, After I came back, I went to work right away in Vermont, restoring an old house. I was very busy with that, but in with my friends in Vermont, I often told stories that of events that occurred in Alaska, and a lot of them told me, you really ought to write a book. And so it was in the back of my mind for a long time. Um, and Other things intervened. I got married, started a career, had kids. And it wasn't until they'd grown up and gone off to college and were in their own lives that I felt like it was finally time I had to sit down and write this before I couldn't remember any of it or it was too late. But I was fortunate because we had kept a journal. Um, it was an old college notebook that I brought along. And at first, it was just a record of how much gas we'd bought, what it cost, where it was, and that kind of thing. But it also became a place where people jotted down notes about things that had happened and it, songs that we had made up along the way. Um, and so it became essentially an outline for a book. And I was fortunate to have that, and I still have it, um, to refer to and to use in sparking memories and fleshing out pieces of the trip.
Does part of you say, because part of me says, I can't believe I actually did this, within the context of, you know, some 50 odd years later or more, some of the things I know I did, if I didn't have other people to validate it, I wouldn't have believed that I could have done it. Do you ever like have that feeling?
Yeah, I do. Partly because uh, I guess some of them seem so outlandish right now, um, bordering on tall tale. Um, and some of them just seem like, with the passage of time, this could no longer happen. These things just don't occur anymore because the situations that you were in um, aren't don't exist anymore. The Alcan Highway is now fully paved, and it's been straightened in many places to make it easier for tourists in Winnebagos to drive there. And nothing wrong with that, but it's not the same experience by any means. Um, there were very few travelers on that road in those days, and you were isolated. I'm not going to compare it to the Oregon Trail or anything like that, but it was sort of a modern day or early modern day version of that, and which was one of its appeals. It really was. But in trying to explain some of the things that happened and events that unfolded, it people look at you with a sense of disbelief because it just seems almost so foreign now. Um, but yes, that that experience does occur to me. I can't believe I did it. And at the time, it was interesting because we fully expected to do it again until the trip ended and we realized just how much it had taken out of all of us. But it, it, it was definitely one of a kind. And, and you know, it was, it stood to be uh, remembered. It stood to be written about. It was worthwhile for um, for its own self as a trip, not as just a memoir for me, but it's almost a record of kind of things you could do when you hitchhiked across the country or took a train across the country in the early 1970s.
How did
So,
your brothers feel about the finished book?
well, that's interesting. Um, my, I guess they've never really talked to me about it. Um, and and I still kind of wonder. Um, I do feel like I portrayed them as honestly as I could, but as humanely as I could as well. and showed my own foibles as well. But you know, um, my younger brother Ben compliments me on my writing frequently, but we've never really had an open conversation about how they feel about the book. And maybe that's some closure that I need to get.
Wow, that's I guess it's surprising but not surprising because maybe they can't believe they did it either. I don't know. But we're running out of time, so I have to say that there are so many parts of this book, even though we know that the three of you survive and nobody gets too injured, there are hiking parts that are just, to me, as a mostly non hiker, terrifying. And I think, I think of the Cheryl Strayed book Wild, where she hikes the Pacific Crest Trail. And even she
Yeah.
didn't encounter what you did twice because you went out and then you came back. So maybe that thought is still too painful for Tim and Ben to even want to think about, because that was hard reading but very suspenseful. Um, so we have to say goodbye, but viewers and listeners, I must ask you to order this book from Amazon because that's where it's available, and you will not regret a minute of the time you spend with Buck and Tim and Ben as they traverse, as Hugh says, they traverse territory that doesn't exist anymore. It's almost like The Call of the Wild by Jack London. That didn't exist when you went up to Canada, but now Alaska and Canada and that road do not exist as you drove on it. So to experience this fully, please pick up Hugh's book, Beyond Two Rivers. And Hugh, thank you so much for joining me on Bookstew and for writing this extraordinary book.
Eileen, thank you very much for having me. It's been great talking with you. I hope that I have struck a chord with your readers, um, but I'm really glad I met you. And I want to just say I'm very impressed with what you're doing with Book Stew, and I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to share these kinds of stories amongst ourselves.
Thanks again, and viewers and listeners, if you buy this and you don't feel about it as I did, I'll give you your money back. So thanks again, Hugh, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much, Eileen. You have a good evening too. Take care. Bye bye.